I'll keep appreciating it and profiting off of it, and I'll see you in the next review.
The fallen leaves tell a story.
ABC News has just confirmed that Sean Diddy Combs was arrested tonight in New York City.
Before that same driver suddenly puts the Honda in reverse and slams back into Ashpia's vehicle.
Dodgers! Okay, let's go!
Those in East LA taking the celebrations to the streets.
Residents on Florida's west central coast are bracing for potentially the worst of it all.
Oh, hug your babies tight.
Amazed that Harvey Weinstein got schlonged. He got hit as hard as he can get hit.
Shut up! I want booty! Shut up!
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
But now, my studies are over! And here he is, coming off of a brief academic hiatus, review to death! That's right! Hello everyone! I'm back. Whew, I've spent the last 2 months getting super ahead on all of my big old graduate work, finishing assignments that I technically didn't have to get finished until May of next year, but it's all done. Hallelujah for that. But I hear you ask, why did you take such a long and cruel break? Didn't you know that we were missing you, that we missed this wonderful dance that we have with King of the Hill, huh? Well, I did know, and I am sorry that I was gone for so long, but the truth is, I just got really tired of having to stop my video production every other week so I could go back and play catch up on assignments that I was falling behind on, so I said, you know what, let's just take one big break, let's get it all done in one huge burst, and now I have, and it's out of the way for good! We are back, baby, and I am going full-time on YouTube. And that has not been the case since the summer of 2023, where, for just one precious month, I was able to make videos without any hindrance, without anything else on my schedule, and now that same condition is here again, and I am so very excited for this new phase of my channel. And now that we're back, oh, we are so back, what is on the docket? What is the next episode on my journey to review all the episodes of King of the Hill in order? What is it?
100.4, she's ready for a stud.
Oh, right. It's the dog sex episode. Oh, okay. Is this what my career has really become? Is this my purpose on Earth? Has the sum of my life and my experiences led me to here, to the point where I'm being tasked to pick apart how Buck Strickland Stud is gonna howdy ma'am the debutante, with of course no flash photography? But hey, that's being a little too flippant, as all of the kinky stinky dog sex is merely the upper layer of what's happening in this episode. We are missing the forest for the trees. You know, I was going to try to do a little bit more with that metaphor. I was going to try to turn it into something else, like, oh, we're missing, like, a bunch of dogs for something else that's like a smaller portion of dogs, but I couldn't come up with anything, so now I'm just calling attention to my poor writing skills. Aren't you glad to have me back? Woohoo! Anyway, as we'll come to see, Hank's efforts at getting Ladybird pregnant is actually a roundabout way of, how do I say this without getting demonetized? Loosening his Hoover Dam, if you know what I mean.
That's why I've been trying to get Ladybird pregnant.
I don't know what those men in that bar told you, but that is not how you have a baby.
Patrolling the Mojave almost makes you wish for nuclear winter, eh, Peg? Anyhoozle, to be serious, fertility is an important issue and is something that people out there really do struggle with, and as much as we can poke fun at Hank's narrow urethra by calling him names like, oh I don't know, Fat Boy Slim, Needle Noodle, and Mr. Wafer Thin Wiener, this medical condition was mentioned in the very first episode of the series, and it does have a meaningful effect and influence over a great deal of Hank and Peggy's relationship.
Yeah, well, we would have liked to have more kids, but Hank has a narrow urethra.
Google, show me this guy's balls, please. Sir, you have a little bit of poop inside your testicles.
Being unable to properly bust through your semen shield and produce a hybrid clone of you and your partner can make people feel frustrated, depressed, and even make them feel kind of worthless. And I have actually met people in real life that have to face such frustrations, as one of the guest speakers in my graduate program wrote this whole article about how her and her husband have struggled for years to conceive a child. And while constant attempts at baby making may sound like fun and games, anybody who's ever played a competitive sport, be that korfball, underwater hockey, or whatever the fuck chess boxing is, that's real. That's a real thing out there. People are training for that. Anyway, those people know that there comes a point where you stop playing the game for fun and you just want to see some damn results already. For example, I have friends that are okay being hard stuck in the lower level competitive ranks of games like Street Fighter, Apex Legends, or Dota, while other people out there consider any match where they didn't win a huge waste of their time, and they may even start to despair that they aren't seeing any growth and go like, oh my god, am I even a good player? Why am I still alive? I couldn't get to triple platinum at this, that, or the other. Oh my god, am I a failure? Yes, you are, because you're playing a game that you claim to enjoy and just dooming all over the place. Just sit there and fuck Peggy and have fun with it, Hank. My god! I would even go so far as to say that I am very impressed that they decided to try this narrative, as most shows out there are centered around the chase, the will they won't they of a sexual relationship. Oh my gosh, will the guy get the girl? Will the girl get with the right guy? We don't often see shows where a couple is in a stable relationship, where they both enjoy having sex, and where they are actively trying to have another kid. That is a very mature and realistic and very unique sort of setting or goal right there, although admittedly it is not as compelling as a show that asks the timeless question of which of these sexy ladies will have the honor of getting smashed by Flavor Flav.
Watch out, I think I was like, wait a minute, I know we don't have no dogs in here, but there's on my stairs.
I was like holding it, and then out of nowhere, it's like my stomach was just like, bitch, she got me.
She's real with it. She's like, yo, check this out, baby, this is who I am.
And I do have to say, it is horribly funny that the beginning of this very serious and somber discussion comes to us in the form of two hounds a-humpin', which must sound horribly awkward and strange to anybody who hasn't seen this episode before. But hey, this isn't just any old dog we're talking about. This is Lady Bird Hill, who was named after Claudia Lady Bird Johnson, wife of President Lyndon Baines Johnson, and is also known as the lady who was appointed the state caretaker of Jumbo. Whoa! And fun fact, the real Lady Bird was actually still alive when this episode aired and would remain alive until 2007, so what I'm trying to say here is that it is entirely possible that she was able to watch Shrek, Shrek 2, and maybe even Shrek the Third, as that came out in theaters just 2 months before her death. Or perhaps she spent the final dignified days of her 94th year of life doing what all the other active seniors were doing in the early 2000s, playing the Wii and looking up 144p video guides on Twilight Princess on YouTube, cause that's what I was doing back in the day. As for the fictional Lady Bird, she has been far and away the most understated and underused member of the Hill House, possessing S-tier ignorability and having a quality that Stephen King would call in his novel The Eyes of the Dragon, and which all of my teachers called me from kindergarten until my senior year in college, dim. And this isn't very surprising, because typically when you have a pet featured in a sitcom, all they'll usually get are just little check-in jokes every once in a while, things that make smart but brief use of the animals, reminding us that they exist and are present around the house, but mostly leaving them out of the day-to-day goings-on of the central conflicts of the show. In thinking about these kind of pets, my mind immediately goes to animals like Eddie from Frasier, Buck from Married with Children, Spot from the Munsters, Meg in Family Guy, and Goro Mad Dog Majima, Lieutenant of the Shimoda Kimono Clan. Kiryu-chan, indeed. However, Ladybird is a different kind of animal. Much like her namesake, she is a very old pooch, meaning that she has quite limited comedic capabilities. She isn't going to be hopping around excitedly or resisting the effects of Moonscorch to reach rare at the Termina Festival, if only. This means that the majority of her usage in the show comes from how Hank regards the old girl, with her being one of the very few things in life that the man is comfortable caring for openly.
I wish you were here to meet him. I miss you so much.
I gotta go. I love you.
And you know, I'd never really stopped to consider this next viewpoint until I sat down to write this, what I'll generously call veiled plea for subscribers. But I'm coming to realize that Hank's caretaking of Ladybird is actually a pretty darn good indicator of how he would handle having a daughter. And yes, before you say anything, I am aware that there is a group of self-satisfied circus animals in the fandom that believe that Hank and Peggy would have been awful parents to a daughter, with Peggy being too jealous of her child to care for her properly, and Hank would have regarded his daughter with neglect, scorn, and disgust. But I tend not to think so poorly of their parenting skills, which admittedly aren't perfect, but would be the envy of many children. But hey, I should really give those people the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps those dour critics of Hank and Peggy are simply being influenced by that one episode of Malcolm in the Middle where Lois imagines what her life would be like with a gender-bent version of her kids, in which they ended up being more manipulative and awful than the boys were, causing untold stress upon poor Hal. But putting that classic show aside, I don't know how it keeps sneaking into all these reviews. I guess it's just on my mind lately. You know, that would actually be an interesting show to review sometime if I ever escape the gravitational pull of King of the Hill, which seems quite unlikely given how lucrative this show is. But putting all that aside, I do strongly believe that Hank and Peggy would have been like excellent parents. They would have done a great job in raising a daughter, despite fears to the contrary. And a majority of my faith in them comes from two primary sources. Number one, how well Hank and Peggy treat Luann. Like, I know she's this disrupting, sort of invading force that Hank doesn't really know how to respond to, but I thought that they treated her pretty darn well for as long as she was living in the house, and I didn't see anything that would make me go, oh yeah, no way, these two should not have a daughter ever. Ugh. Like, red flag right there. Yes, again, they're not the most loving that they could have been, but, you know, Hank is a very sort of kind of guy who thinks a lot about bloodlines, like, oh, she isn't my blood, she's not my family, I bought 3 tickets for the Hill family, Hank Hill, Peggy Hill, and Bobby Hill. Like, he gets very callous, but I feel like that's more of a categorical thing rather than like, oh, I hate having girls in my house, you know. So that's sort of source number one, although admittedly it's not that great. But my second source of confidence comes from episodes like this one, which is all about the admirable level of care that Hank gives to Ladybird.
100.4, she's ready for a stud.
And sure, yes, eventually we'll get to the Aisle 8A episode where Hank boos at Connie getting her first period, which admittedly doesn't install a lot of confidence in how he'd be able to help his actual daughter go through all of that. But come on, that's his neighbor's kid, for God's sakes. She is going through that experience for the very first time and has no frickin' idea of what to do or how to take care of herself, so it just causes this big explosive like, oh my god, I was not preparing to deal with this today, ugh, kind of thing. Now, if Hank had a daughter, which is something relevant to consider because this episode does float the idea of the Hills eventually having another kid, then I am confident enough to wager my own eyeballs. No, that's not high enough stakes. Not high enough stakes by half. No, I would wager your eyeballs, viewers, that Hank and Peggy would have had some sort of basic plan in place for when their daughter experiences her very first egg exodus. Get out of my fallopian tubes! Exodus! God, I hope the neighbors didn't hear that. Let's give him a damn break, shall we, folks? I mean, the Connie thing just sort of snuck up on him because, well, you don't expect to wake up at the start of every week wondering if you're going to end up hearing this from your frenemies' kid.
Now, how do I change one of these things?
Take a salt tablet.
This is all to say, hold on to your eyeballs, I am beyond certain that Hank would be a flexible and mostly attentive parent to whatever kind of kid he has, even if he doesn't fully understand them, because, like, that's pretty much what he already does with Bobby, you feel me? And I really don't think that the majority of rational people out there who watch King of the Hill would go so far as to categorize Hank as an outright bad parent to Bobby, even though, yes, he does struggle quite a bit to relate to his son's life or interests. That does show that there is a bit of distance between the two for sure, and it is often the source of strife and frustration, but that's not being a bad parent, that's being a realistic one, you know? Like, I don't really connect with everything that my dad ever did, and I don't think probably you did either. Like, we all have differences between our parents, and that's just like life, you know? I don't think anybody out there, except for like a weird sort of clone in Utah probably, has ever had like everything completely identical with their parents, both of them, and it's like, you know what, that was a perfect sort of everything. Yeah, great dad, that's the norm. But beyond the question of how Hank structures his affection for the people and animals and vehicles that he loves, we see this is also the episode that provides a large degree of headcanon evidence to a certain fan theory. Oh, you know, that one.
As I recall, your mama was having trouble getting pregnant on account of your daddy's narrow doohickey, and eventually, well, they just gave up on ever having a child of their own, and they did the next best thing. In a moment of weakness on a dark, rainy night, I slept with Peggy. Coach! You! Coach! Why aren't you playing Bobby Hill? I am responsible for that, boy. You play him now! You hear me?
Okay, drama time. Listen, while I personally don't find much merit or plausibility or enjoyability in that theory, the whole point of fan theories is that you're supposed to come up with ideas that lay outside of the norm of whatever you're talking about, be that a game, a movie, or religious doctrine. You're here to seek out alternative, niche, or wildly inappropriate interpretations, so if you're doing all that sort of stuff, then you're doing fan theories right. And if you really, honestly, truly believe that on one dark and stormy night, Bill and Peggy had sex in the Cauldron and conceived a Bobby in a manger that for some reason also had an octopus as part of the menagerie, then I am truly powerless to stop you from believing in it, and I wouldn't do so even if I could, because I ain't yo mom, so get off my rockin' tits and start thinking for yourself. Sheesh. Oh, and little side note here about the production of these reviews. Sometimes when I have to go looking up reference pictures for King of the Hill, you know, when I go into Google and I punch in the names of the characters, especially Luann's for some reason, the image search will cough up a bunch of obituary and memorial photos of real-life people, and I hate it! Ugh! So there I was, just going about my usual business, you know, trying to find a good Bill x Peggy visual, which was such a cursed experience that I eventually had to give up on it entirely. But I was also forced to stare into the kindly faces of dead old people, also named Bill and Peggy, which made me pine for all of the extremely poorly drawn porn, because I hate looking at those faces, because it makes me think like, oh, is that all I'm gonna be? I'm just gonna end up being some old bastard on Google that nobody cares about. Eventually I'll get to the age where people are just like, yeah, you should probably die, and we'll maybe write a paragraph about your life summarizing all the experiences that you did. Oh, you did this and this and this, and that's it, and then you're forgotten, and then you're just something that exists between horribly drawn pornography. Woo, what a life! But okay, let's cut through all my jibber-jabber about dead people that took the ultimate L and allowed themselves to get cooked by Father Time instead of locking the fuck in like a true eternally living Sigma, and get to what we've all been itching to talk about, the profound story of getting a 13-year-old bloodhound pregante.
I knew that stud was no good. He wouldn't even look her in the eye.
The episode starts off with a very familiar sight, one where the guys have gathered around Hank's truck, which does mimic the very first scene of the pilot episode. This establishes that Hank, on top of being the central character of the show, is the kind of person who prefers to have an audience hanging around his work area, which allows him to put forward some running commentary on his project, while also getting some feedback from his peers that are also interested in the things that he cares about. And what a weirdo freak he is for doing that kind of thing. I mean, what sort of irredeemable monster would hold an audience captive like that while they just blither on about their hyperfixations all the livelong day? He's history's greatest monster. And since we're on the subject of weirdness, we see that the day that we've all dreaded has finally arrived. London and France have made landfall in Texas.
I see London, I see France. Told you, Hank, London and France.
My lord, I cannot believe this show would be so disgusting and distasteful as to show an ovulating teenager just walking around in their underpants. Ugh, that is genuinely sickening, as is Peggy's advice for how Hank should be handling Lady Bird's last heat.
Well, she wouldn't have to wear anything if you spayed her or hired someone to do it.
Quit it, knucklehead. The jaws ain't for that.
You know, sometimes the gamers out there will say that King of the Hill is this like fundamentally wholesome and tame show, a very calm and dry experience, the TV equivalent of being wrapped in your grandmother's quilt, one which has just come out of the dryer. But I will always contend that this show is not so secretly much more filthy and wild than people are willing to give it credit for, just like Grandma's history-soaked quilt. Ugh. Like, I don't know of many shows where the question of, oh hey Paulie, come here, do you think that our main character here has the technical know-how on how to remove the ovaries of his beloved pet is a genuine point of discussion, and it could be authentically argued that he could do it. Like, that's nuts! Do you have any idea how crazy that is? Well, I leave you all to discuss the minute details of 7 generations of the finest Georgia inbreeding you ever done seen, and Ladybird's cute little outdoor doggy hutch thing that I don't believe we've ever seen before. Let's kick things over to the County Gun Club, where our old friend Jim Cummings, aka Pops, is having a refined talk about a most dangerous of game.
Dang if he didn't keep going another mile or two. Ain't nothing keeps you sharp for deer season like hunting humans.
Now, because Mr. Cummings is voicing this guy, let's call him for the sake of argument Butcher Pete, who I believe just flew into town and is already chopping up all the women's meat. Between his various hackin', whackin', and occasional smackin', Mr. Pete, who is the best killer that ever lived, works as a dog of the state, a bounty hunter, which is a concept that greatly excites Mr. Gribble.
You're telling me there's a poorly trained quasi-legal police force that operates with few, if any, government controls? It's about time.
This whole storyline with Dale, while extremely funny and enjoyable to behold, is also a rather brilliant exploration into the mindset of, well, you know, okay, it's actually kind of hard to put a definitive title on this sort of person, as there is a lot of overlap between various groups. Let's just say that these are the kind of hyperactive, hyper-engaged folks out there, the ones that fly the Don't Tread on Me and the Blue Lives Matter flags at the same time, without a hint of irony or self-awareness of how those two flags might have contrasting messages. These sort of extremely agitated groups have taken a wide variety of shapes throughout American history, ranging from the Anti-Masonic Party, the McCarthyism trials, the John Birch Society, the American Independent Party, constitutional militia groups, the Minuteman Project, and the current so-called Dark Enlightenment groups, primarily those embodied by the groups that fall under the umbrella term of the alt-right. Basically, these are the paranoid freaks of society, ones who will find whatever scapegoat flavor of the month is and make destroying them their primary goal, be that big government, undocumented immigrants, communist boogeymen, gay people, trans people, or even just their own less aggressive peers, which they will then use as a group of demonized others, you know, just an excuse to get together and get all hot and bothered with the boys. These are the cops that get Punisher tattoos, the haughty bootstrap pushers who loudly wonder why there aren't straight Pride months, even though we already have that. It's called No Nut November, because I can't think of anything more straight than loudly proclaiming your jacking off habits to strangers. Ugh. And of course, these are the folks who attended a funky little hillbilly hoedown that we like to call January 6th. Editor's note. So, I wrote this entire script before the election happened. I recorded it and was actually editing it and got to this stage in the video when the judgment came down. Whew. And I will just say 2 things before I let my past self continue making his very handsome analysis, which hasn't changed in any way from the original version that I wrote in October, so that's all going to stay the same. So what you're hearing now is actually my post-election thoughts. Number 1, if you are a dooming Kamala head that's currently sticking your face in the oven right now, then try not to worry too much. Because you remember these past 4 years of "Let's go Brandon" and all that noise? Well, that gets to be us now. We get to be the underdog moaners that are extremely annoying, unless, of course, we all get put in the gulag for speaking ill of the big cheese, or violently targeted for not kissing the ring. In that case, that might gum up the works a little bit, but what I'm trying to say here is don't disappear into sadness. Don't keep your sorrow inside. Let it ring out for the next 4 years, and more importantly than anything else, do what is best to keep yourself safe, alright? I am here for you, and it will, in all likelihood, be okay. Although I do recognize that a lot of people don't want to be told that it'll be okay right now, because even if you've barely been paying attention to what he says he's going to do, or don't believe much of it and think he's just kidding around, then even then you still know there's some pretty horrific shit coming down the tubes for a lot of people. But I think it's important to find comfort in each other and not give up. Our chances for getting through this whole time, this whole crazy era that we're living through, is much better if we look out for each other and find methods of dealing with the madness.
No! I can't just wallow in sadness. It's time to laugh again!
And point number 2, a humble note for all of the people who voted for Mr. Don Old. Congratulations. Really, this election wasn't a hoax, it wasn't rigged, it is what it is. And I promise I won't be storming the Capitol, so you don't have to worry about any post-election shenanigans, which must be nice. But for me specifically, I'm in this unique win-win situation here. Either the big man's policy changes will prove correct and I can enjoy a bounty of wealth as an independent businessman with low gas prices and a high tax bracket that should see decreased rates for my increasingly growing YouTube channel, all at the cost of vulnerable communities like LGBT folks and people of color getting effed over again. Or if all of those grocery and gas and deficit changes prove wrong and it turns out the economy plan of giving super big tax breaks to the rich people actually don't work out and the entire country gets generally worse and Social Security gets cut and that kneecaps spending of like old people and disabled people and that leads to an explosion of homeless people that will then get a one-way Greyhound bus ticket out of Kentucky and get dumped in San Diego again like they always do, then that means I get to spend the next few years watching all of those big promises go up in smoke, and I am burdened with the unenviable responsibility of saying,
I told you so. I told you so.
Because I lived through 2016, and I didn't see any wall get built, they didn't lock Hillary up, and they certainly didn't get rid of Obamacare, so I am not worried. We have been here before. And if anything, I am excited, because if what's-his-face, Mr. Big Man surprises me and actually builds us up and comes through and is actually better than we think, then that's great, huzzah! But if the whole thing burns down, then we will all be dancing in the ashes.
The American people have never tolerated incompetence in their public officials. You are going to crash and burn, my fat-headed friend.
See? We're still friends. Come on, give us a cuddle.
The Simpsons does it again! How do they predict this sort of stuff? Oh, and if you're watching this video in the far future, then be sure to tell me how good or bad my perspectives here have aged, like wine or milk. Anyway, that's my editor's note. Back to the video already in progress. Without saying the C or R word, which can be exhausting to hear over and over again, let's instead call this group of people something more positive, something that will add a much needed sense of levity to the conversation. Let's call them hamburger helpers, both because it's really positive and it reminds me a lot of that one episode of Metalocalypse where the band Dethklok asked their manager to use the phrase hamburger time instead of death. Classic.
Guys, listen, you're closer to death if you don't see a dog.
Hamburger time! Please use the word hamburger time when speaking to us.
You're closer to hamburger time if you don't see a doctor.
Anyway, whatever you want to call him, Dale and his ilk are the sort of people who simultaneously rebel against government regulations while also aping and envying the very authority that they deride. These aren't the sort of folks who just sit at home watching the old boob tube and getting some mean-spirited chuckles out of a sassy quote-unquote news organization. These are the folks that go out there and make the news, usually in the worst ways imaginable. These are the groups that want absolute immunity for themselves and a total prosecution of their perceived rivals, those who hunger for the destruction of order so they can then impose their own sense of orders on others, even though they are already the most privileged motherfuckers on the planet whose lives would never be meaningfully affected no matter which of the two main American political parties are in power. And as for the subject of Dale and his commando comrades, King of the Hill is able to take the piss out of these homegrown hamburger-helping homunculi in such a wonderfully smart and subtle way that me pointing out the joke feels like I'm projecting my own views onto the show. But I'm really not. I'm just noting and appreciating what the episode is already putting down.
Any man who skips out on his bail can be hunted like an animal, although not eaten.
Damn, and I filled up on silent sticks.
And no, this sort of mockery is not just done on one side of the political spectrum, as Emily Gale and the oh-so-tiresome Mr. McKay are all takedowns of stereotypical liberals, those who inhale California cheeseburgers wrapped in homeless people's diapers, laced with inferior tobaccos and fentanyl in the shape of Flintstone gummies.
Yeah, dude, you were here smoking pot with me.
You can tell that to the cops, I'll back you up.
At 12:05 a.m. Arizona time. Not bleeding liberal time. Not East Coast wine and cheese time. Not West Coast free drugs time. American justice was served. No more lawyers' appeals. No more bills. No more 3 square meals a day. No more excuses.
Those liberals are the ones encouraging the development of cringy acoustics grandpa's guitar songs about turtles and are constantly getting into chat rooms with Gene Roddenberry's wife, the blueprint sex icon that is Majel Barrett. Damn lefties, always sneaking their shitty-ass wagon train to the Stars show and to my King of the Hill episodes. To quote my favorite movie of all time, Creepshow, bastards, dirty bastards.
I hope you die. I hope you die.
On the other side of things, Dale and his gun club buddies are meant to be a broad lampooning of the people that lean even more to the right of the more common sense, practical, and calm person embodied by Hank. Just owning a gun doesn't group you into this stereotype, as people from all identities and political ideologies are armed in America, make no mistake, but gun owners are distinctly different from the kind of people who populate Dale's gun club, who are indeed bordering on fetishists. But anyway, let's bring the conversation back to what's actually happening in this episode, okay?
15 minutes to complete the ethics exam. Good luck and try to remember what I taught you. A, B, A, C.
You see, they're not even learning ethics, he's just having the hamburger boys memorize the answer key. Having the test be about ethics is especially telling, as this isn't a joke about them skipping over safety features or knowledge checks on what kind of criminals they'll be going after or what have you. It's specifically an ethics quiz. Now, is this just a lighthearted joke about how poorly this guy runs the class? Or is it a dig at how power-hungry dopes like this only care about flexing their domineering societal strength over others, oftentimes emboldened by a hat with a funny little slogan or symbol on it, without concern or even awareness if their actions are ethical or not?
Fugitive's name is James Jimmy Hellstrom, a.k.a. Jim Hellstrom. Wanted for unpaid parking tickets.
The hunt is on.
I don't know, I just wouldn't say that this subtext is especially subtle, as this isn't some secretly coded Ovaltine message that I've decrypted, one that would make English teachers weep and applaud me at my podium, rejoicing at how I was able to mold this blank clay, where there was nothing before than just, a silly little joke about silly little guys doing silly non-political things like, what is it again? Oh yes, bounty hunting, which as we all know has never been affected by politics. I've just morphed this conversation into an intricate sculpture of my own personal intents. Yes, if only that kind of rhetorical and critical work were this piss easy to do. Regardless, if you want a more direct confirmation of my reading on Dale's character, where he is shown to be both a passionate critic of authority, as well as someone who eagerly wields it when it helps him put somebody else down, well, here you go.
And much as I like to scoff at the law, I also like to arbitrarily enforce it. Skedaddle, boy. Officer, take him away, and see that his human rights are roundly violated.
What we're seeing in this episode is the two sides of Dale's personality collide, where one part of him wants to boastfully swagger about with his bounty hunter hat, which makes him feel like a badass with unlimited permission and resources to take down those lawbreakers, connecting with the iconic and romanticized image of a Wild West gunman, versus the other side of him that wants to be the outlaw, one who uses his enviable survival talents to duck the tyrannical system of government that would unfairly enforce its standards upon his liberty, a system of rules that he technically never consented to follow. There's a reason why James, aka Jimmy Hellstrom, looks like a mirror version of Dale. They are literally the same person, mind, body, and spirit. But importantly, this does not feel like an overly obvious critique or parody of that kind of complicated and often contemptible person, which is what I'm afraid that they're gonna do in the upcoming reboot. These older episodes were very clear in their messaging and weren't afraid of making fun of nutjobs, sure, but they also didn't turn these kind of people into Mad Magazine caricatures, Like, even in the Mad Dog episode, which is 10 times more bonkers and direct in its messaging than this one is, that episode still has an impressive degree of personality and complexity to it, turning away from a flat auto-generating portrayal of just a crazy hamburger helper survivalist gun nut. Instead, Mad Dog is written as charmingly deranged, with a notable third dimension that makes him so amazing to witness, and he does make us sort of forget about the more unpleasant aspect of these kind of people in real life.
I'll be damned if I let those jackbooted thugs put my yearbook photo all over the CNN.
This is why assigning an individual person with all of the characteristics of a broad political movement is inherently flawed, because people as human beings are inherently much more complicated than any slogan or symbol, some far better and some far, far worse. Of course, to complicate that broad sentiment, when the philosopher Hannah Arendt, who was a German-American philosopher that was once detained by the Gestapo, did her report on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who was a major organizer of the Holocaust, she wrote that Eichmann had taken in so much party propaganda and rhetoric that he had become a non-thinking human being. He had become someone who lacked the ability to self-reflect because there was practically no sense of self left, only a brain filled with pseudo-intellectual cliches. He had become someone who just repeats back vapid nothings, akin to saying, oh, well, you can't cry over spilt milk, or, oh, you can't make an omelet without cracking a few eggs. Like, that doesn't cover the whole scope of what's happened here, and you're just repeating it back because that's like, well, it kind of applies in this situation, so, you know, human beings are at times better and at times much worse than just flat caricatures. Thankfully, King of the Hill rarely puts forward people that feel as banal and inhuman as that. And just as the writers will eventually go on to do with Mad Dog, this episode succeeds in its tongue-in-cheek critique of hamburger helpers by making sure that hilarious jokes and Dale's likable personality are first and foremost on their list of priorities, which makes its lighthearted mockery of these kind of people feel less direct and less unpalatable because it's being filtered through someone that doesn't inhabit one primary character trait. But with all that said, I don't think this more nuanced strategy would play very well in the current age of television and our current culture, which is a huge disadvantage that is facing the reboot. Whereas before, the show could present extreme people like Dale or the Gun Club guys or Mad Dog and be comfortable in the knowledge that these sort of nut jobs are somewhat rare, that kind of exaggerated person has become embraced and even uplifted by the mainstream right wing of politics, making it feel almost impossible to make a joke about them because, like, that's just literally what we have now. Like, real life has become so fundamentally weird and unstable that it feels beyond parody.
Hello?
You don't know who I am, but I know where you live, and if you teach that sex ed class, so help me.
Because if the reboot continues the strategy that the old show maintained, where it presents extreme people with a sort of cockeyed personality, a third dimension that runs ever so slightly against the stereotypes, then I still feel like there'd be some very vocal moaners who would go running to X and post all sorts of like crybaby takes about how, oh my gosh, King of the Hill has forgotten its roots and has turned its backs on the hamburger helping party. How could it do this? How could our, like, mountain show on the hill forget its, like, where it came from and who made it the show it is? I'm taking all of my support away from this show now. Ugh. And that is all just such a blisteringly obvious outcome that it's actually kind of boring to talk about. The outrage machine is one that is extremely predictable and which feeds into the whole, like, parodying of party line rhetoric that Arendt noted in Eichmann. If I have to hear the word woke used unironically one more fucking time, I'm gonna quit YouTube forever. So make sure you don't comment that word or I'll be forced on my honor to humiliate myself by shutting this whole platform down. So don't you do it. Don't you expand my comment section and spread this video around. I swear to God, I'll be so mad. And real talk here, I do honestly feel a small degree of sympathy for the so-called normies of the hamburger helper side of politics, who I really want to imagine are kind of like the polite kids sitting at the back of a classroom, ones who are patiently waiting for the professor to get the asshole loudmouth kids at the front of the class to shut the fuck up so they can get back to discussions of budget and tax regulations and foreign policy and all the boring stuff that actually makes governments work, instead of all the stupid culture war policies that just serves to get the lowest common denominator of idiots to go out and vote over things that will never affect them ever. I am certain at their hearts, those true blue capitalistic hamburglers of America, whose only god is the almighty dollar, would love, love, love to monetize the shit out of the people they demonize, selling all kinds of merch and products and pins and just everything. And yes, you could say that they get a lot of money off of fundraising, but I'll remind you of the 35th rule of acquisition, which is peace is good for business. And there's also a reason why the term rainbow capitalism exists, as it falls perfectly in line with the 111th rule of acquisition: treat people in your debt like family. Exploit them. But I'm sorry, hamburger normies, which, by the way, I am being extremely generous in assuming that you exist, considering whomst you've all collectively voted to represent your interests. I mean, come on, Nikki Haley was right there and you threw her away. Like, what are you doing? She was great for you and your interests, but whatever, I guess she's a girl and that ain't us, baby. Anyway, your wagon is currently hitched to a giant one-eared screaming nightmare clown, which means that making fun of those kind of people in the reboot would be extremely difficult to do, at least compared with the relative ease with which the original King of the Hill series was able to do it. And you know how they were able to pull it off? Because we used to have somebody like Hank to fall back upon, someone who was the stalwart and humble rock, one who represented an idealized and squeaky clean image of those particular kind of voters of the 90s, a person who is competent, compassionate, and fiscally responsible, someone who doesn't judge a man by the color of his skin but by the actions of his heart, and who is most importantly likable, funny, and who doesn't just yap about quickly fact-checked misinformation, meaning that the whole show used to be able to mock the more wacky ends of the extremes without coming off as preachy or smug, because we had Hank. We had Hank as our North Star to guide us back to the truth, and even if the writers did a whole episode making fun of wacky people for being weird, we could still come back to Hank and say, this is who we really are, this is who America is, these are who the good people really are. And I think that's a trick that even some left-leaning shows and comedians really struggle to pull off, as they sometimes try so hard to put forward a straightforward moralistic lesson or specific call-outs that it either aggressively rubs centrists or right-leaning people the wrong way, kind of like getting a groin-grabbingly thorough rub down from a burlap glove, or it just blandly reaffirms what liberal people already believe in without actually adding anything interesting to the conversation. Thus, it fails to get a laugh and will come off as tiresome, annoying, or uninspired, even to the people who agree with those ideas on paper, but they just find themselves unengaged with the unremarkable regurgitated mush that they are being presented. Because both comedy and drama are dependent on a subversion of expectations and the push and pull of characters getting into disagreements, and if you just have a smiling cast of happy people who are all friends and they all get along and they all respect each other's boundaries and they all give each other thumbs up about how excellent they all are, then it all becomes worse than drivel.
Lemonade? Please, I made it just for you.
There's no conflict in this movie.
I might have popped the trunk.
A very good example of a touchy subject like this being handled in a more creative and respectful way while also being very funny comes from, oh my gosh, Malcolm in the Middle again, where Malcolm and Reese are both tricked into believing that the other one is, gasp, gay. Instead of the show desperately trying to reassure the audience again and again and again with hand-wringing platitudes of stuff like, oh no, don't worry, being gay is okay, we're a cool show around here, we are down with the homosexuals, the writers present the boys as initially being shocked, then uncomfortable, and eventually becoming so supportive of each other that it all becomes so deliciously ludicrous.
What's this? Naughty Pool Boys 3. I watched 10 or 12 of these, and this one seems to have the most stuff you guys like. I'm not gay. Malcolm, check out what they're doing in that movie, and then tell me you're not gay.
I mean, hell, this is why I adore Wagon Train to the Stars so much, because it doesn't just put forward glib messages of acceptance and, all races holding hands together in a giant gesture of universal friendship. Yawn, where's the story? Where's the plot in all this, eh? And I wouldn't even say it does so from an exclusively left-leaning perspective either, as Jonathan Archer is essentially just George W. Bush at the helm of a starship, and Deep Space Nine made Space Hitler, of all people, feel like a rebellious hero at times. What the fuck? And it even got a majority of the fandom to fall head over heels in love with the head main man of Space Stalin's secret police. The secret is you just gotta sprinkle in a little bit of homosexual tension and you're gold. But even when it's not doing that, it still challenges those progressive ideals. For example, instead of just saying oh hey, here's an alien race with a male, a female, and a special third sex, isn't that neat? It sure is. I am certainly glad that we met those interesting people who were all so kind and gave us cookies. No, instead they hit us with, hey, dickheads, here's an alien race with a third sex called cogenitors. Ugh. They only make up 3% of the population. Oh, and we use them as sex slaves. Oh, and they're traded between couples because they secrete a special enzyme that the couples absolutely need to get pregnant. Oh, and if the cogenitors ever learn what the word consent is, then they're going to bring our entire planet's birth rate to a screeching halt, which is why we don't teach them how to read or write or even give them names. So you pink-skinned motherfuckers better not tell them that they have a choice in the matter. You better let us keep our slaves or else our entire planet's gonna die. So what do? Do you respect our culture, or do you take away our planet-saving slaves? Ugh. Now that's what I call a sticky situation. Oh, and one final wagon train adjacent note. I actually started watching The Orville recently and was blown away by how well written and stupidly smart that show is. Like how dare you, Seth MacFarlane? How dare you use Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer of all things to bring a tear to my eye? Who the fuck do you think you are? My God, that was so powerful. I loved it. Ooh, man, maybe that series deserves its own review someday. Yes. Man can dream, can't he? A man can dream. Anyway, back to Dale the Bounty Hunter. Dale the Behatted One. Dale the cogenitor between Nancy and John Redcorn. See, there was a point for that whole rant. Haha, I brought it back. I'm brilliant.
Let's get one thing straight, Ladybird. You work for me.
This is actually the very first time so far in the series that we're actually seeing any of Hank's friends get their own Spotlight storyline, one where they are allowed to have the whole run of it by themselves. That's right, it took until the 3rd season, but we finally got a plot that exists independently of what's happening at the Hill House, and how appropriate that the honor of that spotlight goes to Dale. And oh sure, these stories will eventually dovetail into each other at the end, with Dale using Ladybird to get around Jimmy's dogs, which is another bit of deliberate mirroring here, with the two guys using dogs as like chess pieces. Remember that chess boxing I talked about at the beginning of the episode here? Yeah, that's why I brought it up, because I'm some sort of fucking genius. But this is what I'd consider to be our first true blue B-plot in the series, at least in regards to the Hill family always having to have some direct part to play in every secondary story beat. Outside of the beginning of this episode and the letter that Dale leaves in Ladybird's hutch, Hank and Dale don't interact at all after Dale goes off to do his bounty hunter thing, creating a complete separation of the stories. Truth be told, I don't really have a preference when it comes to one episode that has one core storyline for the characters to all dance around versus an episode where there are two totally separate stories that are happening at the same time. Both structures are just tools in our storytelling toolbox, mere options that could serve certain episodes and scenarios better than others. And for this outing, I think they made an extremely smart use of a hardline A and B storyline structure, as the Dale stuff is more energetic and dangerous, while the Ladybird side of things is more introspective and willing to play with some more, subtle jokes.
That's why I've been trying to get Ladybird pregnant. Quit it, knucklehead, the jaws ain't for that.
Ah yes, right. Hank's decision to get Ladybird pregnant. What strikes me as particularly notable about this episode is how it is able to find a smart balance between the sincere and the silly. Because Hank is treating Ladybird's breeding more like he's sending a beloved daughter out on her first big date, as if there's any difference, where he is just as nervous and excited, if not more so than her. It's just we also have to deal with the fact that Ladybird is just like a stupid dog who makes me look bad, ooga booga booga, causing Hank's anticipation to feel equal parts overblown and ridiculous, but also like darn touching and gentle. In a very real way, this episode is primarily about Hank going through a profoundly emotional journey, because he really could have just looked at this in a very pragmatic sort of way, saying to himself like, oh yeah, it's time to get the old dog to make some puppies before it's too late, or he could have adopted a dog or whatever, but instead he treats Ladybird with a reverence and affection, a level of dignity and care that he almost certainly would have given to his daughter, and that is just God, it's so sweet, which is, all then made much more funny when everyone else is acting with way less respect and awe and reverence than he's doing.
I was hoping one of your studs,
One of my boys finally gets to howdy ma'am the debutante.
I mean, for God's sakes, he even gets dressed up for her big day. The man is out here charting the changes in her body temperature to find the optimal ovulation opportunity, and he even uses the Tellington touch, which is apparently a real fucking thing, so go figure. Although from what I've read, it sounds like it's mostly a technique that is used to help for constipation, so we might be getting a different set of puppies there. And all of this begins to form a very familiar echo in time, back to when Hank and Peggy were having trouble conceiving, which is not something that is related to constipation, and I don't want to hear any suggestions to the contrary.
Busy. Occupied.
Look, he's going to the bathroom again.
Yo, this dude be shitting. This guy's a real shitter for real.
It's actually pretty cool how Hank looks exactly the same, while Peggy's hair used to drape downwards instead of being swept upward into the standard beehive style that we see in the present. And I have to say, if I have to pick between the two, I definitely prefer the older style, but the beehive style does make for a really amusing look for Peggy when she gets bedhead. But yes, because Hank's urethra has a lot in common with the British royal family's gene pool, in that they're both too narrow for healthy reproduction, this leaves the young Hills with few viable options.
In vitro fertilization. They mix your boys with one of my ladies in a test tube. Isn't that wonderful?
No, it's science run amok.
Incredible.
It's science run amok.
Some assembly may be required.
Hank's unwillingness to participate in a series of sexual techniques, which I have to say were definitely illegal, meaning that the fertility doctor was actually, an undercover cop trying to arrest people for sex crimes against the state, which, if they had gone through with it, would have put them on Dale's bounty hunting hit list of fuck criminals. All of that is contrasted against the extreme lengths that he is willing to go through for Lady Bird's sake. His efforts for Lady Bird begin to drive Peggy crazy, which, as was once famously said in the movie Murder by Death, sounds like a short ride to me.
I hope he knows how to stop that thing.
You know, I've actually been thinking a lot about episodes where Peggy is driven mad by Hank's lack of affection for her or his manipulation of her feelings. My mind primarily goes to the episodes where she, steals Bobby's turkey and that one episode where she got that job at Alamo Beer. Because the thing about Hank is, like so many long married men, he does take his relationship for granted. He doesn't do these big lovey-dovey acts because, hey, they're married, so of course he loves her. If he didn't love her, they wouldn't be married. 2 + 2 = 4, duh. The number 2 doesn't have to keep giving flowers and champagne and handfuls of Gushers and Slim Jims to the other number 2 to maintain the equation of 4. It just becomes 4 once, and that's it. But human beings are rarely one-and-done creatures. We need reassurances, we need check-ins and affirmations, we need someone to eat off of our backs while the Golden Girls goes on, ignored in the background, romantic stuff like that. To put it in car terms, Hank hasn't changed the oil in his relationship in 13 frickin' years, which means the engine block, the core of this old gal, is starting to come apart. And it is pretty funny how the guy who is so big on maintenance and ensuring that things are structurally sound has this huge blind spot for Peggy's needs, which does lead to a discordant home life.
What happened?
I don't know. Maybe you left her pen open.
Loser! You're a loser! Are you feeling sorry for yourself?
And sure, yes, I will concede that Hank is an emotionally stunted fellow much of the time, and that these problems affect much more than just his marriage. It isn't very surprising that he's the kind of guy who really doesn't like to show off his love for Peggy. However, it's also not like he's locked into that mode with absolute immobility. He is able to break out of what we might expect him to do every once in a while to give us some impressive instances of emotional expansion. And it is this flexibility that makes King of the Hill's characters feel so true to life, and why we tend to talk about them more like they're real people, ones that either inspire or disappoint us with their actions.
If you win, you get the shame of having beat up a girl. If you lose, you just better hope she snaps your neck. That's the quickest way.
They have a general preferred set of personality quirks and thought processes, I don't know. But they can also be brought out of them if circumstances are notable enough, much like how, in the Pyramid Scheme episode, Peggy was able to force Bill out of his preference for suffering and his desire to be used. In that instance, she rose above what we might expect of her and actually gave Bill the praise that he so rightly deserved, and she admitted that she was a bad person for taking advantage of him, and she even coaxed him into graciously accepting her apology, allowing him a dignified exit from his compulsive need for her approval. But that's also what makes this series so difficult to talk about as a reviewer, because the example that I just showed was Peggy showcasing humility and an unwillingness to continue to exploit Bill when he was hurt, creating a definitive barrier of how far Peggy will go to accomplish her goals, but that whole problem was caused by her willingness to manipulate him in the first place. She will actually go pretty darn deep into unsavory territory, but will stop just short of total abuse, which creates a situation that we can't entirely forgive or condemn. If they had her do something that's completely cut and dry, where I could just say, oh yeah, what a terrible person she is, yuck, that would actually make things a lot easier for me to talk about with y'all, as I could just swaddle myself in a, universally accepted opinion, instead of having to yank my own teeth out to justify some niche opinion I have, like having sympathy for Leon's drug habits and his rehab efforts, or how I think it'd be pretty darn cool if I could attach myself to Donna, either one like a male anglerfish, and become little more than a fertilization parasite, which is a process that may have helped Peggy and or Lady Bird considerably. And bang, just like that, we've somehow brought it all the way back around to the topic of getting Lady Bird pregnant. Ha ha ha! Ooh, I'm so good.
I'm afraid she's got a narrow uterus.
Oh, no.
That's right, in a 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance, Hank and Ladybird both have narrow genitalia, meaning that Ladybird can't get pregnant unless Hank starts doing all these carefully structured techniques by helping her to get pregnant. You know, not like that, whatever, you know what I mean. Most of these techniques he picks up from these 2 gentlemen in the park.
We went to a bar, and before it all went horribly wrong, they told me a bunch of things I can do to get Ladybird pregnant.
My God, Hank, you really hate those homosexuals. Well, okay, at least that's the heavy insinuation. Now, we could make up our own overblown scenario to excuse this whole, like, those guys were gay and that's gross joke, such as those 2 were really cannibals that almost split Hank's wishbone ass over a charcoal grill, or maybe they're insane weirdos that believe that dogs are the superior creatures on the planet and they've been trying to breed a Planet of the Apes-style uprising, or maybe they're trying to create a batch of clones that they can introduce into the general population because, hey, why does their body types look so similar to the oddball that was standing behind Dale in the bounty hunter class, which, by the way, was definitely a scam class done only to sucker money out of guys who wanted a hat. And how can I so confidently proclaim it a scam? Well, because it was held at the Econo Suites, and the Econo Suites doesn't have bounty hunter classes. Dun dun dun! But going back to that weird-looking guy, I think this is an excellent chance for me to dust off an old classic of the channel. My friends, I present to you once again, The Gallery of Strangeness. While we try to mentally recover from those awful sights, Bill and Bouncin' Bobby Hill start exchanging King of the Hill lore for dog biscuits, with the boy learning that his parents actually got Ladybird before they had Bobby, preferring to have a dog poop on their carpet than a kid do it, leading Bobby to believe that his parents were unable to get Peggy pregnant. This causes our precious little Butterball to go through a nasty panic attack.
Mr. Dauterive, was I adopted?
Well, kiddo, according to an oh-so-popular fan theory, and which is the ugly truth that Gregnant Daniels has been trying to hide from us for years, it says that Hank was never actually able to relax enough to put international love into Pitbull, but the Bill-dozer stepped up, and while he didn't play baseball, he sure hit a home run.
I can't point, Hank.
That's okay. Don't look down at your naked nethers.
Or if that's too gross of an analogy for you, then here's a snippet from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the Reeve's Tale specifically. This wench, thick and well-grown she was, with camoose nose and eyes grey as glass, with buttocks broad and breasts round and high, but right fair was her hair, I will not lie, the person of the town, for she was fair, in purpose was to maken his heir. My God, English perverts have been calling asses thick for over 600 years. That is crazy. Chaucer, you naughty boy, you truly are the king of every pervert that ever put dripping pen to creamy page. But whoa, hey, hold on, wait a minute. This whole conversation's getting a little too freak nasty even for me. Let's pull it back a little bit here. I can't believe Chaucer was one of those degenerates who thinks that Bill was able to cuckold Hank and produce Bobby. What a naughty boy you were, Geoffrey C. Let's just get this whole discussion out of the gutter that is medieval England and back on track. Let's focus, let's, pull ourselves out of this horrible bog of Bill's potential part in the parentage and return to the classy subject of, dogs fucking. Or at least that's what I would say if Dale hadn't stolen sweetest Ladybird away. At least he had the decency of leaving a note behind, which gives us the address where he is headed, allowing the plot to continue forth, which I would call the height of consideration. And it's a darn good thing he did, because Peggy was about to call up a couple of hard pipe-hitting fellas to go to work on the homes here, with a pair of pliers and a blowtorch. You hear me talking, hillbilly boy? Peggy ain't done with you by a damn sight. She was about to get medieval on you, moa.
Oh, you're still here.
Most people would rightfully see this as a psychotic overreaction by Peggy, especially considering the really gross thing, or maybe lucky thing if you're that kind of person, that she says afterwards.
You're blaming me? I would have to be pretty passive-aggressive to do something like that and spit in your coffee every day for a week.
Unfortunately for my long-suffering audience, I love problematic women, which is why I always romance Haley in Stardew Valley, why I believe Queen Marika did nothing wrong in Elden Ring, and why I voted for Hillary. I just love supporting problematic blondes who make me suffer and hate my fucking life.
What did they teach you in that graduate school?
How to survive.
I love you. But oh no, fellas, just like any online conversation involving the phrase best girl, Lady Bird's unclad ass is attracting a bunch of salivating dogs, a problem that is compounded by a certain structural superpower.
Between this sun and the incredible airtight construction of an American-made truck, I'd say she's got about 5 minutes.
I do get such a kick out of Hank's unabashed love for America and Made in America products, especially when it pops up in a time of crisis or inappropriate moments. Oh, it's so good. If America was everything that Hank thought it was, then what a place this would be. And now, finally, after everything I've put you through in this episode, we finally arrive at the core conflict between Peggy and Hank, where she reveals how much lesser she's been feeling compared to Lady Bird, when Hank never did any of that temperature stuff on her behalf when they were trying to get pregnant. And perhaps surprisingly to some, Hank is able to de-escalate this problem with a deeply heartfelt answer.
I didn't do all that thermometer stuff with you because, you know, where's the romance? With Lady Bird, it doesn't matter. She's only a dog. She's not my wife. You're my wife.
There is just something so deeply sweet and caring and loving about this sentiment. I adore it. Hank doesn't want to make their intimate moments feel planned out or scheduled or artificially constructed because he doesn't want to lose the baseline closeness that they have, which is surprising considering that Hank is Mr. Planned It Out. He is the schedule king, so him deliberately wanting to leave room for things to feel spontaneous is very noteworthy. On the flip side of things, Peggy's idea of love is to have an attentive and doting experience, I dare not say the princess treatment, no, one where the lovey feelings are stated plainly enough through clear acts that they couldn't be mistaken as just a, passing fancy. Peggy wants a degree of intentionality, which does make sense as she is a more cognitively focused person, a brain. Whereas Hank approaches the experience of romance in a much less direct way, constructing an overall experience of care, which is admittedly much harder to see directly, unlike your mother, who is easy to see from anywhere.
I don't think you've ever even met my mother.
It's actually such a frickin' beautiful little sentiment that, despite the challenges they're having with conceiving, which, was no doubt worsened by Hank smoking his sperm count into the gutter, he doesn't want to make lovemaking feel robotic or like work. It's as if he's aware of how persnickety he can be, and that this is like the one area of his life where he knows that he needs to allow himself to really cut loose. Or as loose as he can get anyway. And it also goes a long way into explaining his reasoning for wanting another puppy around the house, as he is trying to recapture the best feelings of the early days of the relationship.
I always kind of believed that playing with that puppy was the one thing that finally relaxed me and my me, enough for us to have a baby.
God, now that's what I would call romantic. The man has recognized what helped bring him and Peggy closer and which helped him overcome his dick disability, and he's been doing all of this stuff for Lady Bird in order to bring back that feeling of those glory days. Although I do have to say, he did go more than a little bit overboard, especially with how he replaced Peggy's mom on the speed dial with Mr. Strickland in case they needed to call up a little doggy daycare session. Ugh. My God, what are we doing here? Are we running a Pokemon daycare center? This is a house of freaky business. Ooh.
9 times out of 10, they go right for the crotch, and I see 10 dogs out there.
Now, what's a little bit weird here is that their desire to have a new kid does linger on into the next episode, but it doesn't really come back as a part of a bigger discussion until the very end of the season, which is 20 goddamn episodes away. This creates a quasi-two-parter, one that isn't directly connected by events, but more about an overhanging mood. It's almost as if the showrunners wanted to linger on the point throughout the season, but kept getting caught up in a bunch of other really cool ideas that they kind of forgot about it until they needed a season finisher. And I do really enjoy this storyline quite a lot actually, as it brings us a ton of very interesting and fun relationship moments between Hank and Peggy, which I just love to see. However, I wish it had been a little bit more present throughout the entire season. And speaking of presents, Bobby gets Mr. Dauterive his dog hormone biscuits, Dale's doppelganger offers him up SpaghettiOs, and Hank secures Lady Bird from her Cujo-esque style trap, and she is later dropped straight on Hank's big old gut. Ooh. Everybody is left in a better position than when we began, except for Jimmy Hellstrom, who was later hunted down by Anton Chigurh and was fed to his own dogs, with 9 out of 10 going straight for the groin, attaching to his dick and balls like Pikmin. Why can't I leave things nice? Tisk tisk. Anyway, this is a pretty darn decent episode, one that feels like it wanted to set up some bigger ideas, but not all of those really came to fruition, meaning that this episode then becomes oddly shaped when looking at the series as a whole. Although I will always give extra credit for experimentation and bold attempts at growing the show beyond what we might expect, even if the experiment did fall a little flat.
They're using this new experimental fertility drug. I figure if it's safe enough for humans in France, it's probably safe enough for dogs in America.
Actually, to be perfectly honest, I'm really glad to have this episode in my rearview mirror, because between the John Redcorn affair and this one, I have been making far too many sex jokes in these reviews than I typically like to do. But hey, come on, that stuff's behind us now, which feels great. I don't know about y'all, but I am ready for a breath of fresh air. Something cute or wholesome. I would like that, wouldn't you? I think I would. So what is next on the schedule? What do we got?
Has you been having trouble baby making?
No.
Is it 'cause of that skinny pipe in your thingy?
Oh, okay. Goodness. Why don't we just call these episodes like the big sexy 3 of season 3, as they all happen straight in a row, which I believe they would call in bowling a stuffed turkey. I am really sorry, folks. I'm just out here working with what the episodes are throwing at me, which is apparently all sex all the time. Pregnancy sex, no less. Sheesh. But our examination of those carefully collected pee sticks is for next time. For now, we can say that this episode, titled Pregnant Pause, has indeed been reviewed to death. Thank you all so much for watching, and especially like a big thank you for being pregnant. Patient with me in all this during the break. I did not mean to say that. That was a genuine slip up. What the fuck? I'm keeping that in. I promise the firefighting episode isn't far away now. There are procedures in place. Procedures, yes. Yes, procedures.